Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, we're keeping our focus on the questioning of the acting chairman of the AFCC. Even though, as we speak, you never can tell, status may change quick and fast because things are really happening so fast. We're joined this morning by Mr. Femi Falana, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Good morning, sir, and thank you for joining us today on the program. Well, at the moment, because, the reports indicating that even members of the commission seem to be at a loss as to what to do because Mr. Magu hasn't instructed anybody else, to stand in his stead. Many are wondering what's going to happen to his status. Is he still acting? How long will this probe go on for? So much, as some daily say, uncertainty about what is playing out. How are you internalizing all of this as they are playing out?
Well, for me, even though Mr. Ibrahim Magu is presumed innocent of all the allegations leveled against him, it is an anticlimax for an anti-corruption czar to be linked to the miasma of corrupt practice. No doubt, the fate that has befallen Magu so far, for me, is indeed a moral disaster for the anti-corruption crusade of the government. Therefore, the ongoing investigation should be a wake-up call on the federal government to embark on a comprehensive house-cleaning exercise. Otherwise, the investigation will be a selective exercise in, futility. And I think the federal government owes the public a duty, particularly that institution. If it is confirmed that Mr. Magu has been asked to step aside, there has to be, following the law establishing the agency, the topmost officer in the agency should be asked to continue to act for him. A mistake must never be made this time around, whereby an outsider is appointed in an acting capacity for years. That error must be avoided this time around. So what one will expect is for the secretary of the commission, who is the head, who should be the head of the administration for now, to be asked to act in the interim so that when the government nominates a new person, the name or the nomination will be sent to the Senate so that we do not make the same mistake. For me, I think that is the way we should go. But the panel should also try as much as possible, to carry out a thorough investigation so that the agency and the country can draw the relevant lessons from this unfortunate incident.
When you talk about morality, are you seeing it as a two-edged sword? Because some say the statement attributed to the presidency is indicating that under this administration, nobody is above scrutiny. And for there to be, even if it's 22 allegations against the acting chairman of the AFCC that is being investigated, isn't that a dent or a question mark on that office? And so if the authorities are following the law, what role does morality play here?
No, my position is that, yes, I agree, nobody should be above the law or above scrutiny. But in an atmosphere where impunity reigns supreme, that principle must be applied at all times. If you're talking of illegal killing of policemen in Taraba State, the soldiers involved must be brought to book, and all those who violate the rights of our people, apart from those who engage in corrupt practices. So, and that's why I said earlier, this ongoing exercise must not end with Magu. We must now begin the regime must now show and demonstrate the readiness to embark on a comprehensive house cleaning so that Nigerians will not continue to allege selective arrest and prosecution of corrupt elements in the government and outside the government. You know, I mean, that's my own position. But having regards to the way and manner EFCC chairman or chairperson have been removed since the time of Mr. Nuhu Ribadu, there is now a challenge before the government to look at the entire architecture, you know, and see that we do not, I mean, even though Mr. Magu is the only one that is facing a presidential panel, but I do know that in the case of Mr. Nuhu Ribadu, all manners of investigations were carried out. But at the end of the day, he was found to be as clean as snow, even though he made his own errors, like, you know, all human beings. So this time around, Mr. Magu forced himself a duty to come out clean and ensure that he cooperates fully with the investigation panel so that these allegations will be thoroughly investigated, you know, and the law has to take its course, you know.
Yeah, but the thing about this too, Mr. Falana, is that these are, can we consider them as just errors because these allegations are weighty if there was on the declaration of the amount of monies that have been recovered, disobedience to court orders, insubordinations. These are very weighty allegations, don't you think?
No, of course, they're extremely weighty allegations. But I'm saying for us to avoid another person exercising such wide powers without inhibition, without accountability, we must now look at why did you get to this mess? And that is why I'm going to say that henceforth, the board of the EFCC, by virtue of Section 2 of the EFCC Act, there is supposed to be a 25-member board of that agency. Why has the board not been working? Again, Section 2037 of the EFCC Act provides that not later than September of every year, the EFCC shall submit its annual report to the National Assembly. Have the reports been submitted? Are they debated? Were suggestions made to correct errors or infractions of the law? And these are the points I'm making. Otherwise, it's going to be a vicious cycle.
You know, it is on, I mean, the same commission, EFCC, under Mr. Ibrahim Magu, that the government has said, well, we're fighting corruption over the past couple of years. The same man, and apparently, I mean, DSS had released a report in 2016 casting a shadow on his integrity. But apparently, over time, it seems the president has trusted him beyond all doubt. So looking at some of these allegations and what have you, do you think it casts a doubt or a shadow of doubt on the activities and some of the gains of the EFCC in this couple of years?
Well, there's no doubt that the ongoing investigation has put a question mark on the integrity of the agency in carrying out its assignment. And that is why the government must move very quickly to draw a line of dichotomy between the individuality of Mr. Ibrahim Magu and the institution, so that the entire gains recorded by the EFCC over the years will not be thrown away with the baby and you won't throw away the baby and the bathwater. And that is why these very serious allegations must be thoroughly investigated. Again, as I said, in an atmosphere of lack of accountability, the tendency is to be there. The tendency is there to abuse powers. And that is why the accountability agencies must do its work. Must do their work so that we won't repeat this very tragic experience.
If I can go back a bit, it appears as though these powers were given to him by the president. He obviously had the full backing of the president because, he can't operate in isolation. He didn't get there himself. So again, obviously he had the backing of the president. So what seemed to have changed?
No, the president would not back corrupt practices on the part of any individual. The law has created an agency that has the powers of arrest, of investigation, of prosecution, and even of disposal of forfeited assets. These are enormous powers that will now require a review. What the law had envisaged was that the 25-member board of the agency, which constituted, the board of the agency is constituted by all relevant financial statutory bodies, including including the State Security Service, the police, the central bank, and so on and so forth, and 4 eminent Nigerians of unimpeachable integrity to sit as a board and review the activities of the organization from time to time. But I'm saying the board is not working. Secondly, the EFCC is required by Section 37 of the Establishment Act to submit an annual report to both chambers of the National Assembly. One would have expected that the relevant committees of both houses will scrutinize the reports with a view to ensuring that the organization does not depart from its core objectives.
At the moment, we do have Mr. Norris Quakers, a senior advocate of Nigeria, joining us as well this morning. Good morning, Mr. Quakers, and thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, my pleasure.
Okay, so as this is playing out now, there's so much that people are trying to figure out in terms of the implications and the gravity of what is going on. What do you think of this whole process?
Well, for me, I must say that the part of my brother's comment, Mr. Femi Falana, that Mr. Ayo, Honorable Justice Ayo,
I'm back.
who happens to be the chairman of the panel, will be seen to be fair and just. I don't think, and I keep saying it, that once you read any sort of political undertone or undercurrent to what is going on, that it is the president's prerogative. You recall that when the Senate refused to confirm him, the presidency went ahead and said that he's an appointee of the president, and as such, even the Senate indisposition to allow the chairman to continue was rebuffed, and so he's continued in office. Now, what is going on is simply this. I mean, if we go by what we have read and information that we have, is to the fact that he's been investigated, and when he's been investigated, he's been asked to step aside, and so that he will not have access to information within his reach, so that usually, like, you don't want to tamper with information. If it comes out, if after the investigation it comes out clean, right, everyone will know that he's not guilty as been alleged. But allegation has been made. It is imperative for the chairman or the committee to look into it to ascertain and confirm if those allegations can be substantiated or true.
But if you... Okay, go ahead.
So just a quick one. You mentioned the political end of the whole conversation. And that's seems like, as Mr. Femi Falana also referenced, something that seems to be, quote-unquote, normal with every top dog at the EFCC. How much of this is political and how much is legal?
You know, I started by saying that I don't want us to read political undertone to what is going on. Now, for me, it is legal because allegations have been made. The president stepped in, set up a panel, and the panel is currently investigating him. Now, because he's an appointee of the president, it is the president's prerogative to look into all of this. If at the end of the day he is not found guilty, he'll be given a clean bill. Now, if he's found guilty, that's the end of his continuation as chairman of the commission. So the legal aspect is the fact that there is a presidential committee that has been set up to investigate allegations made against the chairman of a corrupt, anti-corrupt institution, anti-corrupt agency set up by the president to look into financial crimes. And so if the chairman of that institution is now being accused of financial impropriety or abuse of office and a number of other things, it stands to reason, without necessarily taking him to court, the president has the power. He set up a panel and the panel is investigating him. If the panel at the end of the day gives him a clean bill, he goes back to continue. Or if not, the president will just appoint somebody else. Mind you, he's yet to be confirmed. He's been in acting capacity for quite a while. And the president stood by him all this while to say, look, this is the person I want for the job. And so you can't impose someone else on me. So if the president has appointed him, and the president is now saying that because of allegations against him, he must be investigated, I think it's just fair and just that we allow the process to run its course.
What then do you say to those who feel that this is some power play between Mr. Ibrahim Magu and the Minister of Justice? Because, I mean, you also remember that there is this member of the Presidential Advisory Council on Anti-Corruption who thinks it's a power play. What do you say to that?
You say, look, I'll be honest with you. You can't overrule such considerations or such sentiments or talk. And our system is such that we read meanings into everything. There's always some consideration for either political, religion, ethnic, etc. Now, but we need to understand this. Has there been an allegation against the person of Ibrahim Magu? Now, we read a while back, even when the erstwhile chairman, Waziri, is Farida Waziri, said a number of things that were also not complimentary at that time, that he was being investigated, blah, 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 but nothing came out of it. Now, a president who appointed him, mind you, these allegations have always been there, but nothing really happened. So if the president is now saying that, look, a panel should look into the allegations against this man. Now, you must also understand that the game has since changed. Perhaps maybe new players have come on board, and they feel that, look, this is something that the president must also look into. Ibrahim Gambari, the new the new staff, you will recall, said some things that, look, it's no longer going to be business as usual. That his role is to ensure that he advises the president correctly. Now, if you notice in recent times, there have been some changes in terms of policy thrust of this government. It might not be perfect, but you can see a number of things that there's a consciousness to do what is right. So if an allegation has been made against the chairman of an anti-corruption agency, right, and that this is a government that is attempting or trying to project an image of anti-corruption, right? Now, if the chairman has been accused, it's naturally followed that he should be investigated. Yes, there could be power play, but I don't want to look at the consideration in terms of power play.
Okay, so what we'll do, gentlemen, we'll go to break, but we'll come back to all of you and then get your perspectives moving forward. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Sunrise Today. We're keeping our focus on the continued questioning of the acting chairman of the AFCC, Mr. Ibrahim Magu, for the second day. Let's get back to Mr. Femi Falana, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Well, some of the allegations out there, the report indicates that the Attorney General of the Federation did say that the acting chairman, one of the accusations leveled against him is that he's said to have recovered the total of 504 billion naira, but lodged 543 billion naira in the recovery account to the CBN. And then this fans the embers of some school of thought that said, look, benefit of hindsight now, that report by the DSS that did indicate that he was not fit to be in that office, that if, no matter what happens with this investigation, some are thinking for the integrity and for the sake of that office and our fight against corruption, he shouldn't be seen to go back to that office. Do you agree with that?
Well, I fully agree with my learned friend, Mr. Qualker's essay, that an investigation is being conducted. If at the end of the day is found not liable, the government may feel that he should go back to the office. But if is indicted, one way or the other, the law will have to take its course. There's no sentiment about it. We must be fair to all and sundry. All that Mr. Ibrahim Magu requires at this stage is to be given the opportunity to defend himself. These are allegations, even though serious allegations, but they remain allegations until they are proven, in this case, beyond all reasonable doubt. But the law is on his side. He's being given all the opportunity to make a representation and defend the allegations. That is all that the law requires at this stage. If it's not found liable, of course, the government may feel, okay, you should go back. He may now on his own feel, oh, have been sufficiently embarrassed. I want to go back to the police. But this is not the first time that an EFCC chairman has been investigated. And there should be no reading of political motivations to all this exercise. Is the prerogative of the government to investigate allegations of misconduct or corruption or abuse of office. And the public, because this is a public office, we must also ensure that due process is followed. And once due process is followed, nobody can accuse the government of malafide, bad faith. That is the way I think this whole exercise should be viewed.
Staying with this acting issue, yes, the National Assembly failed to confirm him substantive, as it were. Do you think that acting, toga perhaps might have hindered some of his activities in office? I mean, did that come to play any role whatsoever in his activities or achievement or otherwise in office?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, again, you have to look at the whole, our experience with this matter, in this matter. His acting capacity was challenged in court, and the Federal Court ruled that the president has the powers under Section 171 of the Constitution to appoint him. But people have raised the question whether you can act beyond the 4-year tenure of the office, I think that one is also a question to address. But the president is empowered to appoint an officer in an acting capacity, but that cannot provide an opportunity, right, as it were, to conduct yourself in the office without being questioned. And I think that is what is going on.
Mr. Fernandez, do you agree with some lawyers believe that he has already been indicted by that DSS report? So the question of if he's indicted doesn't really arise.
No, I think there is a problem here. And I think the government also owes Nigeria an explanation. Following the SSS report, the government claimed to have investigated the allegations, and the letter was even sent to the Senate that you have been cleared. But I want to believe that after that letter to the Senate, the government now went back, to look at the allegations once again. The government has now said there is a basis to investigate. As far as the government is concerned, there is what you call a prima facie case for investigation. And that is the exercise that is going on, which must be supported, even by Mr. Magu himself. He needs to clear his own name, which has been marred in, mud.
Let's take this back to Mr. Falana then and see if he can at least respond to this question, and then we can move on. The EFCC over time has been said to be more reactive than proactive. Does the EFCC have the power to initiate action on its own without getting any report or any complaint from anybody about a person's activity?
Well, as far as the law is concerned, particularly Section 7 of the EFCC Act, the Commission is empowered to investigate anybody suspected to have enriched himself through engagement in economic and financial crimes, and that will include corruption. And what the EFCC has done over the years is to adopt both styles, both methods of investigation, either on the basis of petitions or based on reports. Even reports read in the newspapers, the EFCC has had to move. Sometimes the EFCC, through the instrumentality of mutual legal assistance, has received requests from abroad through the Office of the Attorney General to investigate certain Nigerians, alleged to be involved in economic and financial crimes. So there is no hard and fast rule about this. So the EFCC has been proactive and reactive, and this is allowed by law.
Does that then give teeth to those allegations of late action on certain cases, such as the one involving a musician, Naira Marley, and not providing enough, evidence about certain things?
Again, these are allegations being investigated, and it will be unfair to engage in judgmental analysis, until the panel that has been empowered or, assigned to do this work by the president concludes his work. For now, I am not in a position to comment on the merit or otherwise of any of the allegations. It won't be fair. I can't usurp the functions of the panel. Neither can I make prejudicial or statements that will be prejudicial to the right of Mr. Ibrahim Magu to fair hearing.
But the way the whole thing is playing itself out now, Mr. Falana, do you think we'll have an opportunity to address some of the things that played out prior to his confirmation as to whether or not he can be in an acting capacity? Because as it is now, if he doesn't go back to that office, can he be entitled to anything in terms of his entitlements? As an acting president, I thought it's only when he's substantive that you can be referred to as a former chairman, and there you could get your entitlements if you leave the office. But as it is now, isn't it dicey as a result of all of that scenario that played out, which left him in an acting capacity till date?
Serving police officer seconded to the EFCC. If the government no longer requires his services in the EFCC, he goes back to the police. Ceteris paribus. All things being equal. So he hasn't lost anything, or he wouldn't have lost anything.
All right, let's take this back to Mr. Quickers now, see if he can hear us now. How do you respond to some of these things? Do you think it is substantive enough for him to, for the organization, under Magu or any other, to be proactive as opposed to just waiting for reports or anything before taking any action?
You remember I started by saying that the Process of Crime Act, for instance, in the United Kingdom empowers the Financial Intelligence Unit to investigate anyone, not necessarily based on a report. And so the EFCC is also empowered in like manner to do the same. The most important thing is that investigation will be conducted and the suspect will be invited, questions will be asked, and then the report will be done. If it is found weighty, the suspect will be charged accordingly to court. And that's what we describe by due process. So it's imperative that we understand it in like manner, that the EFCC is not a toothless bulldog. It's also very effective. Another Magu, in fairness, EFCC has also lived up to his societal perception assessment. Yeah, I won't consider the organization as being weak. Neither would I describe it as being too ineffective. Also, very, very effective under Magu. And you recall that the Zambian professor gave EFCC a pass mark, and globally, EFCC has also been recognized as being so very effective, particularly under Magu, and I give that to him. I will not sit here and join others in tarnishing the image of the anti-corruption agency because Magu is being investigated. So for me, I think that we can't describe the organization as not being proactive. It's indeed being proactive. I know cases of persons who have been invited based on their means of livelihood, the need for them to come, and not necessarily based on the report. But sometimes when you want to have political consideration, you now hear people say things like, oh, that why can't they investigate this person? But forgetting the fact that there are times when they work on petition, there are times on their own, the law empowers them to also ask questions. If a civil servant, for instance, has a private jet, is it not worth investigating? Is it not worth asking questions? What's his means of livelihood? How did he end up buying a private jet? How did he end up building a house, a palatial home? And what is his means of livelihood? So to me, to that extent, I think the EFCC has also been proactive.
But as it is now, you think that all of that, whatever it might have achieved, will now could be tainted, whichever way, depending on the way the pendulum swings about this panel's investigation? Because if he spent 2 days in custody, so that is already tarnishing certain things, don't you think? Because if the panel now says, no, you've been found guilty, will people still refer to all of that? Wouldn't they say, look, we told you about the mode of operation, which some lawyers had questioned before now?
I like the way Mr. Femi Falana put it. If at the end of the day, mind you, he has a place that he can always fall back to. If at the end of the day he feels that, look, my image has been tarnished, I can no longer continue, he can do two things. If he's pulled out of the EFCC, even if they say go back and he says, no, I'm not going back, he can also go as far as saying that, look, he doesn't want to serve again in the police force. And then he puts in his letter and then retires, that his image has been tarred. But I also don't want us to rejoice or be happy that someone is being pulled out. Investigation is ongoing because allegations have been made against him. And so if at the end of the day he's not found guilty, he might decide. But you see, our society is an environment where people don't do things honorably. If he decides that, look, I don't want to continue with this work, I want to just go and live a private life, I think I've had enough of public service. It's his prerogative. He can choose to do so. He can So let's us not read meanings into all of this. Yes, his image at the end of the day might be tarred, but if he's not found guilty, if he's asked to step aside because he's being investigated, and some people now will now read that to me, no, that it was because he was found guilty. Mr. Ayos and the Honorable Justice Ayos investigate thoroughly, and I know him as a very fair chance. If at the end of the day his name is clear, and that's the end of the matter. But and then there's something again Mr. Falana said, which I totally agree with. You must understand this, that he has not been indicted. He has made allegations have been made against him. The process of unearthing the allegation has commenced. And so we can't read meaning into all of this. Now,
Mr. Quickers, the thing about this is this. Pardon me to jump in, but the thing about it is this. In this society, we know people will always read meanings into things. Even when normally, as a citizen, if you have an invitation from the AFCC, people read meaning into that alone. So what can anyone do about that? Should we leave this to the acting chairman of the AFCC? Because there's an impression, there's a perception that people have about that office. And with this development now, there's equally a perception. So should he resign for the sake of that office at the moment?
Now, like I said, if at the end of it all, because you see, he's going through a process, what you call a cleansing process. It comes out of it untainted, unsoiled, right? What is expected to do is, look, I've been scandalized, I've been traumatized, I can no longer continue in this office. And then he puts in his letter. But at least the report is condemned out there that he was not found guilty. And that's the end of the matter. For me, that's the end of it. For perception, there's nothing you can do. The mere fact that I know a friend of mine whose son said to his dad when he saw his classmate friend on TV being taken for prostitution, he looked at his dad and said, "Oh, I didn't know my friend's father is a criminal." Now, for him, the perception is that, oh, his friend's dad has been arrested and been tried. Now, the man wasn't found guilty. It's just mere perception that anybody who is exposed to facing the law is already adjudged a criminal. And then you flip the body. It's for him to establish that he's innocent and not that his perception. So that perception is guilty, and he has to establish that he's innocent. So these are some of the problems with our society in terms of perception. But there's nothing you can do about perception.
Right. Well, let's see if we can broaden this conversation. And we have joining us this morning also via Zoom, Abiodun Owonikoko, who is a senior advocate of Nigeria. Mr. Owonikoko, thank you for joining us this morning. Well, we've talked largely about the process leading up to where we are right now. Today. And, you know, for some people, they're looking at the big picture. They're saying that maybe this brings up that conversation around having strong institutions as opposed to strong individuals, as it were, because it appears as though this is what this is about, strong individual as opposed to strong institution. Do you think that debate is worth looking into right now, not just for the EFCC, but across board?
Thank you. I believe that the EFCC as a commission has suffered from misrepresentation of its mandate in the public arena simply because of justifiable discontent with the way corruption appears to have enveloped our society in a manner that institutions seem incapable of addressing it. So we tend to put the EFCC in historic part of regimes, Ribadu time, Waziri time, Lamode time, and now Magu time. In reality, this was a body created by law as an institution clearly charged with the function of confronting financial crimes and economic crimes. And the personalization of leadership has been the bane of that institution. So that each time people seem to complain about EFCC, you see that they normally identify an individual as their albatross in EFCC rather than seeing it as an institution. I don't recall a situation where people would look at FBI and they would then attack the leadership as the cause of their woes. The reason it has been so in Nigeria is because we have personalized that office. Unfortunately, giving the credits to the present regime to actually fight corruption, they did not appear to have moved from that perception. And that's why we're having this problem. Otherwise, the issue of investigating certain activities in it would be a routine matter. As you would recall, we copied this system from essentially Singapore. And in Singapore, a different body entirely is the ombudsman that oversees EFCC outside of the EFCC's operation itself. In Nigeria, we created an EFCC in which the body itself is its own supervisor, with the exception, with the little room for the Attorney General and Supervising Ministry to once in a while intervene. Now that means from time to time, and there has not been that oversight, which, if not for the unfortunate friction between the executive and the legislature, should have been played by the National Assembly. Now, let's look at what we have here. For 5 good years, somebody has been chairman and accounting officer of EFCC who has not been validly appointed because his appointment took legality from having been confirmed by the Senate. It never happened. So he's been acting for a period of 5 years when even substantive tenure for EFCC chairman should be 4 years. So we have today a situation where, because of this development now, by the time whatever happens to the inquiry, we will have to start, it will have to be a begin again exercise, which is very unfortunate. The trajectory of success achieved, where we have had high profile criminal suspects being prosecuted successfully and sent to jail, and which, if anybody will be fair and honest, has given EFCC a good visage in the public arena. So we must from now address some of the key structural problems in the composition of EFCC itself. I recall that before the last tenure of the last Senate, there had been this law, this bill that was in the pipeline to address some of these inadequacies of the EFCC, particularly the head of the EFCC. Why do we limit the pool to persons of the rank of Assistant Commissioner of Police, forgetting that this is an individual that will have control over even the president when it comes to investigation of crimes, the governors. At the state level, does an AC relate directly with the governor? At the state level. So there is something to be addressed about the qualification for appointment as chairman of the FCC. You can bring a young man there and it will make all the difference if he has all the enthusiasm and the commitment to work. So I'm not necessarily saying that anybody below the rank of Commissioner of Police or AC may not. But I think, given what we have seen, immaturity has severely damaged the image of EFCC by those who use best practice and international standards to judge his activity. So I'll say that as we have today, the president has a right under the Act to remove any member of the board of the commission, including chairman, on grounds of inability to perform the function of his office or in the interest of the public. What we are going through presently is an inquiry. An inquiry does not actually constitute a trial, which will lead to conviction. And this inquiry is also an indictment on the functionality of the governance. Because you know that EFCC is a statutory reporting body to National Assembly, and its activity ought to be audited and audited every year. Because of the conflict between the executive and legislature for the past 5 years, it has suited some people to allow them to run, as a law on its own. So this constant annual check on its activity has not happened in the last 4 years, because the Senate cannot be expected to be asking EFCC to come and report to it when they don't even agree that it has a legally appointed chairman. So while the president might have good reasons he did not want to bend, it also exposes the FCC to a lot of weaknesses over the past 5 years, which some people internally might have actually exploited. And that's what we are seeing, without prejudice to the outcome of the panel of inquiry. Don't forget, that inquiry can only come up with a recommendation. And it's
all right, Mr. Wendigoko, my apologies, but we'll come back to you and others, Mr. Falana and Mr. Quakers, to get your concluding thoughts on that subject matter when we return in just a moment. Please stay with us. All right, welcome back. It's our concluding moments now with the gentleman. Let's start with Mr. Femi Falana. Give us your concluding thoughts. Now, Nigerians want fairness and justice. You alluded to process as well to be seen to be of such. But from part of what Mr. Wendigoko was saying, that, look, it does appear as though this panel, they will have a limit from the points of law. First, do we expect that they finish without a recommendation? And if they do, shouldn't the case then go to a proper court? Because some of these things have got the bother on corruption as well.
Well, I think the point my learned colleague, Mr. Biodo Wonikoko, has made is that at the end of the day, the panel can only make recommendations to the president. It is the prerogative of the president to accept the report and the recommendations or reject them, or if there are allegations of indictment, the president may then say, okay, maybe we should go to the court of law. But again, as I said earlier, there's nothing going on now that is strange. In the case of Mr. Nuhu Ribadu, he was asked to proceed to Kuru for a course. He completed the course on the day of the graduation. The government, the Yaradua government, moved Vietnamese violently to yank him off the queue. He had his wife and his family and his children, but they removed him from the queue. As if that was not enough, he was tried before the Code of Conduct Tribunal. I defended him, and we produced his asset declaration form because they said he never declared. Now, from there, he was dismissed as a police officer, as an assistant inspector general of police, it was my learned friend, Tayo Yechibo, said, who defended him. At the end of the day, the Jonathan administration reviewed the entire problem and discovered that it was proceeded against. The code of conduct case was discontinued and dismissed by the court. His rank was restored, and I expect that in this case, if Mr. Ibrahim Magu is found not guilty, at the end of the day, he will either be asked to go back to the police force or be asked to continue in office. But if the other way around, again, the law has to take its course. There's no sentiment about it. But like my friend, learned friend, Mr. Pokas has said, the EFCC has made tremendous progress in the last 5 years, which cannot be rubbish. And that is why I said earlier, we must not throw away the baby and the bathwater. We must allow this process to run its full course. At the end of the day, the public must know where we move from there. But the final point, whether we want to allow this system to remain or not, the accountability mechanisms put in place by the law must be made to function. Whether the Senate have confirmed Mr. Ibrahim Magu or not in the last 5 years, there is a statutory duty that the report of activities of the EFCC must be monitored, must be debated annually. 2, there is a board of 25 members, including the governor of the central bank or his nominee, including the inspector general of police or his nominee, including the director general of the...
In the interest of fairness and justice, should this go to trial, should the chairman of the acting chairman of the commission just resign, having seen the way previous people have happened? He may not return to this office after all.
If I may say this, Chamberlain, if at the end of the day, mind you, and I like the way Mr. Abiodun Onikokwesi put it, it's an inquiry. If he's indicted, that is the end of his career. They could do one or two things. Either allow him to resign and go back to his police force, or he on his own might decide that, look, I don't want to continue in this office. I also don't want to continue as a police officer. And then he resigns. And that's the end of his service to the nation. That if the government now decides that is indeed a weighty allegation that has been substantiated, what will happen then is criminal prosecution might commence. Because if you notice, the allegations made against him might be weighty. Now, if it is substantiated and confirmed, the government can decide to prosecute him. Now, there's also an aspect that Mr. Abiodun could touch, and that's something that is so very vital that we also need to address. And that is the fact that, just like President Barack Obama said, the greatest challenge to Africa is that we are not building institutions, but building personalities. And it's something that we also need to address. We need to have strong institutions and not strong personalities. You recall that we've had, every now and again, there's always a comparison. Oh, during Nuhu Ribadu's era, these were the things that EFCC was able to do. Now, comparing Nuhu Ribadu with Waziri, now when Magu leaves, the next question is, who will then be appointed to man the affairs of the EFCC? Then there's going to be also a comparison. But in fairness, this particular time, the agency has also been very effective. Now, the aspect of accountability with Mr. Femi Falana and also touched is something that we think that should be looked into. The time has come. Now, the agency was seen as an agency that was not submitting itself to being investigated, to internal inquiry. I quite agree that there's also a need to have an ombudsman, a policeman watching the policeman. So it's also like in other civilized crimes, you have internal control, you have internal affairs. They also investigate agencies of government saddled with the responsibility of enforcement. And my conclusion will simply be this. Professor Wadialo said sometime back said, the greatest challenge to us as a people is not in want of rules, regulations, and laws. It is the attitude. I do not see, for instance, the chairman of the EFCC, right, investigating a sitting president. I don't see that happening. I also don't see the chairman, for instance, inviting either the vice president, or even you could see sometimes governors have been investigated, but this particular chairman, in fairness to him, he was quite effective. But the greatest challenge now is when he leaves, the next person will come, will be rattled by what he has gone through. You recall that Mr. Falana talked about no rebuttal. Some people might decide that, look, I don't want to be scandalized. I don't want to be disgraced. I would rather not take this appointment. And so you have a situation where people who are willing to serve will not make themselves available. You remember the case of Grade, former Minister for Health, and what she said about public service and how it has and scars those who are willing to come in and serve. So for me, we need to develop institutions and not individuals.
All right, then, Mr. Norris Quakers, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, as well as Mr. Femi Falana, also a Senior Advocate of Nigeria. And unfortunately, we couldn't reconnect with Mr. Abiodun Uwonikoko, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. So maybe we may try at a later date. But we thank you all, gentlemen, for talking to us today.